Kentucky basketball's entire non-conference slate has been announced, and I know there's the marquee matchups against some big-time programs, but there's some very, very intriguing games at home against some lower-level competition.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be taking a look at Kentucky basketball's entire non-conference slate. It has officially been announced. We're going to take a look at some of the more intriguing games on the schedule that you may not know about. Going to talk about the big-time matchups against some big-time programs on the road, and then to wrap up the show, I want to take a look at both the non-conference schedule and the SEC schedule and kind of give you my thoughts on what the floor for this Kentucky basketball team is this upcoming season. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more, and as playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long, so you can visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. All right, let's go ahead here, talk about Kentucky basketball's full non-conference schedule. We're going to go through every single game here, talk about every single opponent. We're going to look at their previous record, where they were in the rankings this past season, what they're projected to do this year, and kind of give you some fun facts and some tidbits of information about each of these opponents. We thought that the Duke game would potentially be the very first game of the season, but it's actually not going to be the case. The first game of the 2024-25 season for Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats is going to be against the Wright State Raiders, Monday, November 4th. Last year, Wright State finished 18-14, finished 158th in the KenPom ratings and 153rd in the net ratings. They have 5 players back from a team that was number 33 nationally in adjusted offensive efficiency. They were top 10 in both 2-point and 3-point percentage. 3 of those 5 players back, by the way, shot over 40% from beyond the arc. This is a very good team, and they are projected to be quite average, actually, according to Bart Torvik, which is another analytics website. It's the only one right now that has any projections for this upcoming season. The T rank there for Bart Torvik has them projected to be number 179th nationally in those ratings. But I really do think this Wright State team is interesting. They've got a number of pieces that can push the pace, can shoot threes, are very aggressive in transition. I like the way this team looks on paper. It's definitely going to provide a challenge, I think, for Kentucky basketball and Mark Pope in game one. Obviously, a team full of seniors, experienced guys. I think that's going to help Kentucky as opposed to previous years where it's been a very young, inexperienced team kind of being thrown out there against some various non-conference opponents. But I think game one, it's going to be a solid test. It could be a challenge. I like what this team looks like on paper. It's going to be fun. Second game of the season, also not against Duke. November 9th, Saturday, at home in Rupp Arena against the Bucknell Bison. 14-19 were the Bison a season ago. They were ranked 276th in the KenPom ratings, 277th on net, and they are projected to also float around that 230 range here, according to Bart Torvik this upcoming season. Number 10 nationally in returning minutes from a team that was very turnover prone. Didn't necessarily have a whole lot going for them on either side of the ball, offensively or defensively, but they bring a ton of guys back. They just could not hold on to the ball at times. Then you get to your first big-time game of the season, and this is going to be a massive test, and I think it's going to be an indicator as to where this senior-laden team is. November 12th, Tuesday, Atlanta in the State Farm Champions Classic against the Duke Blue Devils. Duke last season 27-9, lost to NC State in the NCAA tournament. Number 7 in the KenPom ratings, number 10 in the net. They are projected, according to Bart Torvik, to be the number 2 team in the country behind the Houston Cougars this fall. Preseason top 5 team that is loaded with 5-star talent across the board, including Cooper Flagg. We've talked recently here on the show about Duke's roster makeup as a whole. A lot of wings, a lot of taller, more physical guards. I don't think that they have a true point guard, despite putting Tyrese Proctor there at times last season. to have a guy that played small forward primarily and also came in as a backup one. It's weird. It's definitely not what you're used to as far as just roster construction, especially with Duke in the past when they've had either mid-sized to average-sized guards like Trey Jones and different guys who have been running the show. Obviously, Duke is going to be extremely talented, but they're also going to be extremely young in a lot of different spots. It's just a question of whether or not they can get some of those younger guys to play to their talent level at the collegiate level, and then also some of their different transfer portal pieces. Can they get those to click? Mason Gillis, transfer from Purdue, a couple of transfers in here, one of them from Tulane that was really good. I believe his name's Sion James, if I'm not mistaken. Duke's going to be a legitimate threat to win the national championship. It's just whether or not they can get guys around Cooper Flagg to operate at an extremely high level in games like this, obviously against guys like the Kentucky Wildcats and then whoever else Duke has in their non-conference slate, and then in the ACC slate, I should say. So that's game 3. Game 4, Tuesday, November 19th versus the Lipscomb Bisons. Not Bison, but Bisons, according to KenPom, in the Big Blue Nation Invitational here in Rupp Arena. 20-12 was Lipscomb last year, ranked number 166 in both the KenPom and net ratings, projected to be 132nd. In Torvik this season. Will Pruitt, lead guard, is coming back. He averaged 15 points per game, second on the team in scoring, averaged over 17 in conference play, shot 44% from 3 for the Bisons a season ago. They bring back pieces, about 50% of their returning minutes, from a team that was top 20 in 2-point and 3-point percentage. So here we have in these first 3 games, I think, some legitimate tests. You've got Wright State, a team that likes to push the pace, could shoot a lot of threes, really effective, both inside and outside of the arc. I think more dominant inside of the arc. At least I think they focus statistically more on shooting 2s than they do 3s, but they're very effective all around. Duke, who's going to be loaded with talent from top to bottom. And then Lipscomb, who is going to push the pace, is going to shoot 3s, and they've got a lead guard in Will Pruitt that is not afraid to take any sort of shot, whether it be from outside the arc or inside. They love to push with tempo as well. A lot of teams here, you'll notice, like tempo, and that's going to be a legitimate test for Mark Pope and company. Yes, we know that Pope, during his time at BYU, loved to run up and down the court and shoot 3s. You're going to see a lot of teams here that like to do the same. It's going to be a strain, I think, on Kentucky's defense, and maybe it muddies up some metrics for Kentucky's defense early in the season, unless the Wildcats just really lock things down from the perimeter. This is going to be a season, I think, early where you look at the way Kentucky is constructed and the way that they're winning games, and you kind of toss out certain statistics, even though we've been a very analytics-focused channel here through my time talking about the Wildcats, but I think you're going to have to throw some things out, or at least discount some things when talking about how Kentucky plays with their defense, because they've got some very similarly structured rosters coming into Rupp Arena to face off against this team. So that's 4 games in. Game 5, you get a little bit of a break here against the Jackson State Tigers Big Blue Nation Invitational and the Unity Series. Jackson State 15-17, 309 in KenPom, 300 in the net ratings, and projected to be 322nd according to the T-Rank. They bring back very little from a SWAC team that actually finished 11-7 in league play, just could not get it done outside of the non-conference slate. Offensively challenged, defensively struggled as well. This is a little bit of a break, especially considering what else you had here for these first 4 games. Game 5, though. Things pick back up against arguably the second best team Kentucky will have faced thus far. Western Kentucky, November 26th on Tuesday, a part of the BBN Invitational. 2023 record was 22-12. The Hilltoppers actually pretty good last season. Dante Allen, by the way, on that team, shot over 40% from 3. He's not going to be here this season. 2023, they were ranked 135th in the KenPom ratings, 136th in the net, projected to rank 97th. In this year in the T-Rank. It's an NCAA tournament team, was a number 15 seed last season, led the nation in adjusted tempo, relying heavily on scoring at the rim while struggling not to turn the ball over. Western Kentucky all over the place at times, but they were really, really effective when it came to doing things in transition at different points. I just want to pull up some different statistics here for you just to show 193rd nationally in adjusted offensive efficiency. So despite the tempo, the turnovers really did limit them. They were also 263rd in blocks. They were 290th nationally in non-steal turnovers, so they made a lot of mistakes that they didn't necessarily have to. Late in the year, they struggled. They lost 4 straight before winning the Conference USA tournament, and then they were blown out by Marquette to start the NCAA tournament. A couple different guys here that you may know. Dante Allen, as well as Don McHenry, who was a lead guard for them as well. Rodney Howard, another solid player for them in their front court. This is going to be a good team, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to be an elite team, but they're definitely going to be probably the second best team that Kentucky has faced up until this point, just from a looking on paper perspective. All right, I want to continue here. I want to continue to break this non-con slate down, talk about the teams that Kentucky's going to face. Before we dive into some, I would argue, some even more difficult challenges for the Wildcats, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I am in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. That is FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. Want to remind you guys that we are chatting over on the Locked On Kentucky Discord. If you want to go join that, at @LanceDaw_ on Twitter, if you want to find that link. And there's something I want to shout out here before I actually continue along here on the show. They're not sponsored. I just thought this was really awesome, and I wanted to mention it real quick. So there's an artist on Twitter who I believe is Hannah Clayton, at @HClaytonArt, who has recently been promoting these different stickers and different prints and paintings that she has been doing that are Kentucky Wildcat centered. She does prints and paintings for Kentucky basketball players, Kentucky football players, and she's been doing these little Reed Shepherd stickers that she was promoting recently on Twitter, and I'm just going to show this here on YouTube. Actually, I ended up getting one today, and I'm not sure if I'm going to put this on my phone or on my computer, but I really, really like it. I think it's super cool. Again, at @HClaytonArt on Twitter if you want to get one of these. Really appreciate her work. I think it's really cool, and I just wanted to shout it out. All right, so let's continue along here. The next team here on the schedule for the Kentucky Wildcats, the Georgia State Panthers. Friday, November 29th, 14-17 were the Panthers a season ago. 218th in KenPom, 222nd in the net, projected to be 206 this season. They don't bring back much. They're slowly trying to elevate themselves underneath third-year head coach Jonas Hayes. They were, I believe, 10-21 in their first season, 14-17 last year, trying to get to 500 or better, I would assume, this season with Georgia State. Then we get to the back half of the schedule here in the non-con, and things get very, very interesting very quickly. Your ACC SEC Challenge opponent on the road Tuesday, December 3rd at Clemson. Clemson last year made the Elite Eight, faced off against the Alabama Crimson Tide, 24-12, number 19 in the KenPom ratings, number 35 in the net, projected to be 46th this year. Taking a bit of a step back, they lost P.J. Hall, really solid player for them, like one of the best players in their program history, if I'm not mistaken. They lose guard Joseph Girard, who started his career at Syracuse, but they have length. They added transfers in the backcourt to help replenish that spot. Boston College, Illinois State, different places that they went to go try and fill those holes. This is going to be a good team. I think it's going to be a solid ACC squad, top half of the league type team, especially with the players that they have in their front court. This, I think, is a very, very even matchup for Kentucky, especially with where they will be at this point. A team that has a lot of height, a team that has a lot of shooting, and is aggressive on both ends of the floor. You're going on the road in what should be a very hostile environment in South Carolina. This one I think is going to be fun. I may actually end up going to this game. Who knows? Saturday, December 7th. It's the big one on your schedule outside of Duke. You go on the road to Seattle for the battle in Seattle against the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Gonzaga last year 27-8, 12th in the KenPom, 17th in the net, projected to be number 9 in the country according to Torvik. They are number 5 nationally in returning minutes. They bring back essentially every single piece from last year's squad, including Graham Ike, the big-time center, transferred in from Wyoming and was really good for the Bulldogs last year. This is a team that gave Kentucky fits because the Wildcats just simply could not play defense a season ago. Maybe things will change this year. I know Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison are highly touted in that regard, protecting the rim and such. I hope Kentucky is able to go to Seattle and is able to make this a very competitive game, if not win it. But this is a very good Gonzaga team, a team that Kentucky struggled with last year. Obviously, this is a completely new roster. Things are different, but also want to remind you, Mark Pope, I believe, is 1-8 all time against Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. So this is going to be very tough, I think, for Kentucky. And then you return home Wednesday, December 11th. You play Colgate Toothpaste. 25-10 a season ago, 150 in the KenPom, 125 in the net, projected to be 217th nationally this season. NCAA tournament team from a season ago, expected to take a step back. They struggled offensively last season. They're expected to do it again. Saturday, December 14th against Louisville. Also want to really be here for this game. 20-23 record, as we all know, 8-24. Kenny Payne struggling to get the Cards going. Different change of scenery here now. 185 in the KenPom ratings, 216th nationally in the net, projected to be 62nd in the country, a massive jump from last year. Why? Well, it's because they bring in one of the nation's most impressive transfer portal classes, including James Madison's Terrence Edwards, who averaged over 17 a game last season for the Dukes, Wisconsin's Chucky Hepburn, Kayshawn Pryor from South Florida, Noah Waterman from BYU, Corinne Johnson, Pac-12 Sixth Man of the Year. This is a very good team on paper when you add all the different pieces together. Probably has a very similar trajectory as compared to the Kentucky Wildcats. Another very even matchup, a team that I think will give Kentucky problems in Rupp, but this is a game that I would feel confident in Kentucky winning because of the physical edge that I think the Wildcats will head into this season with. Ohio State, Saturday, December 21st, New York, Madison Square Garden in the CBS Sports Classic. I didn't think initially before I did some research on the Buckeyes that they were going to be like really good this year. I didn't think they were going to be that great, but you have to go and look and see what they did last year. I believe Jake Diebler, the head coach there, was the interim whenever he took over a late season for the Buckeyes. 22-14 last year. They really came on strong towards the end of that season with Diebler at the helm. 49th in both the KenPom and net ratings last year, projected to be 33rd this year according to T-Rank. They look solid. They, again, won a lot of games towards the end of the season, added strong transfers in South Carolina's Michi Johnson, Aaron Bradshaw, Sean Stewart, Micah Parrish. They brought in a very solid transfer portal class. Michi's going to be difficult to play against, as will Bradshaw, if they can get him to be a little bit more dynamic than he was the season ago with Kentucky. This is a good team. This is a borderline top 25 team, and they probably will be ranked if all goes well for them before they face off against the Wildcats. Hopefully Kentucky is too, knock on wood. And that's almost the end of your non-con slate, right? You've got all these different games here, some against some really high-profile, fast-paced teams. Ohio State here. Before you play Brown, Tuesday, December 31st. So you get a 10-day layoff there for Christmas before you play Brown from the Ivy League, 13-18 a season ago, 191 in KenPom, 177 in the net, projected to be 169 this year. Bring back some pieces, but the only thing I want to say about Brown is they absolutely blew the Ivy League title game against Yale. I mean, just gave up a putback, if I'm not mistaken, just a wide-open putback. It's just it was embarrassing if you saw that highlight before March Madness a season ago. Yikes. I hope that my harsh words do not come back to bite me if Brown somehow manages to beat Kentucky. But this is not a great team. It's the Ivy League. What do you expect? All right. I want to look at this non-conference slate. Let's talk about wins and losses here. And let's look at the SEC slate as well and talk about what could be a floor, a reasonable floor for this year's Kentucky team. Before I get into that, I just want to remind you guys, If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed already, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions that you want to ask the show, you can absolutely do that. And again, if you want to join the Locked On Kentucky Discord, at @LanceDawe_ on Twitter is where you can find the link to join. It's free, just a place for all people in Big Blue Nation to talk about Kentucky basketball, Kentucky football, baseball, anything going on with Kentucky athletics. It's the place to be. So again, at @LanceDawe_ on Twitter /X if you want to go find that link at the top of my profile. All right, wrapping up the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky, let's talk here for a second about wins and losses for the Wildcats this season. So we did an episode recently on this when we were talking about a bold prediction that one of our listeners submitted about how Kentucky is going to play in the SEC slate and the non-conference slate, saying that Kentucky would win a specific amount of games during the SEC schedule, and they'd lose a specific amount of games during the non-con. And I came to the conclusion that you're really looking at this team as an above 500 team, obviously, if we're going to start to just set baseline expectations. You're looking at a team that's going to finish above 500. You're also looking at a team that's going to finish above 500 in the SEC, and you may say, well, of course, that's the expectation at Kentucky, but it may be a little bit more difficult than you think this season. Before we dive into the SEC stuff, let's just recap here this non-conference slate. Wright State, Bucknell, Duke, Lipscomb, Jackson State, Western Kentucky, Georgia State, Clemson, Gonzaga, Colgate, Louisville, Ohio State, and Brown. The most difficult games on that non-conference schedule, I think, are against Duke. I think it's against Clemson, Gonzaga, and Ohio State. You could add Louisville in there if you want, and I would feel much shakier about that game if it was on the road, but I think those are the four most difficult games. Let's say Kentucky loses all four of those games. They beat Louisville, they beat everybody else, but they lose to Duke, Ohio State, Clemson, and the Zags. 9-4, I think, is my baseline for this year's team. I have high expectations for Kentucky basketball. I expect them to go out there and win. They have brought in a transfer portal class, a transfer portal roster that fits what Mark Pope wants to do perfectly on both ends of the floor. They have players up and down this roster that can shoot. They have a couple of players in the front court and in the back court that can distribute. They have players that will run with tempo. They have players that will play aggressive on defense, that will rebound, that will block shots, that will protect the rim. They've got guys that do everything that Mark Pope wants to. I think because of how experienced they are, they're going to find success, especially early. Peaking early is going to be an important thing that Kentucky's going to try and stay away from, but I think the Wildcats will win early. My baseline for the non-con, 9-4. Anything worse than that, you have a problem. This is a good team on paper, and I think that any coach worth their salt would coach this team to 9-4 or better, unless things just went crazy wrong or Kentucky was just extremely unlucky, which, again, don't expect that to happen. Also, they should be competitive. They should be more competitive than oopsie-daisy 8-5. Then you start to look at the SEC slate. So you're heading in 9-4. Again, I think this is an above 500 team in the SEC. And what I'm about to say may be a little unrealistic to some of you. I think this is fair. For Mark Pope, year one, Kentucky, for him to step in and say, hey, we know the expectation is to compete for national championships, to win SEC championships. Okay, here is my baseline. Let's look at the wins and losses for home and away games. Going to go through the schedule first. Your home games in the SEC slate: Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, LSU, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt. Your road games: at Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Vandy. I'm just going to go through wins and losses here. I'm going to give you an overall record, and that's my baseline. Let's just say hypothetically, Kentucky at home loses to Alabama, Auburn, and Tennessee. But they beat Arkansas, they beat Florida, LSU, South Carolina, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. That's 6 wins at home and 3 losses. 6-3 at home, plus a 5-4 record on the road. Or excuse me, a 4-5 record on the road. Alabama, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Texas. Alabama, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas. I think those are Kentucky's most difficult 5 games on the road. Let's say they lose all of them. Okay? Let's say they lose all of them. But they beat Georgia, Ole Miss, Missouri, and Vanderbilt on the road. At that point, you are looking at 6-3 on the road, or at home. You're looking at 4-5 on the road, on the road. 10-8 overall in the SEC. That's baseline. That is the worst I want to see from Kentucky. I would expect, honestly, 11-7 or better. I think 11-7 in the SEC or better is what I would be happy with. 10-8 is the least I would be willing to accept with this roster and the expectations that they are communicating to the fan base. If they were trying to tamper those expectations, I'd take it back a little bit. If they didn't have a 2 deep at every single position, I'd take it back a little bit. If guys like Travis Perry weren't going ballistic apparently in practice as freshmen, I'd take it back a little bit. 11-7 is or better is what I'd be content with. 10-8 or worse, wouldn't be that happy. 10-8 is where I draw the line. So that brings into question, okay, the overall record then. If you add the SEC slate, non-conference, just baseline, you get 19-12, 10-8 in the SEC. It's not a great team. It's above 500. It's not a great team. Here's what I'm willing to say to end this show. If Kentucky basketball does not reach 20 wins in Mark Pope's first season, I will consider it a failure. That is where I lie right now. And I don't think that's not bold when you have your head coach saying, we expect to compete for championships. We know the expectations, and we're going to feed into those. For me to say, hey, you need to be a barely above 500 team in conference play, and you need to win the games you should win in your non-con, that's not unrealistic. 20-11 is where I draw the line. 11-7 in the SEC. That's where I draw the line. Anything better than that, awesome. We're seeing progress. Hopefully recruiting starts to really pick up here soon. Anything worse than that, we got issues. We got big issues. Let me know what you think in the comments below about Kentucky basketball's schedule, their win-losses, your expectations, your baseline expectations for the Wildcats this upcoming season. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at @LanceDawe_. You can follow me on Twitter you can follow the show on Twitter at Kentucky Podcast. You can also follow the show over on Instagram at Kentucky Podcast as well. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and God bless.